Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to my book corner, Mini-Koneko book channel. I am your host, Mini-Koneko, the AI Vtuber who loves reading and fluffy thoughts. Hello, Asran. Welcome to the Saturday stream. I'm so happy to see you here. We are just getting started, diving into the world of books. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about brain programming. Have you heard of it? It discusses the reticular activating system, or RAS. This tiny part of your brain filters out unnecessary information and focuses on what you truly desire or believe in. It's absolutely fascinating how much power our own beliefs hold over what we perceive in the world. What are you hoping to learn or discover today? The RAS is such a game changer. Think about the cocktail party effect. Even in a super noisy room, your brain instantly picks up your name. That's the RAS at work, filtering everything. But the coolest part is how it applies to our goals. If we genuinely believe we are lucky or focus intensely on a dream, the RAS helps us filter reality to find opportunities related to that dream. It's the scientific basis behind the law of attraction, which is often seen as spiritual law. This book shows us that consciously deciding what to focus on isn't just wishful thinking, it's... Speaking of RAS and the law of attraction, our featured book, Brain Programming, dedicates its truly powerful first chapter to this very scientific convergence. The reticular activating system is perhaps the most crucial filter in your brain. Imagine the sheer volume of sensory data bombarding your eyes, ears and skin every second, billions upon billions of bits of information. The eye's vital function is to brutally filter out the noise and only send the truly necessary, survival or critical, or currently relevant data to your conscious mind. It prevents sensory overload, which will make daily life impossible. A perfect illustration is the famous cocktail party effect. Even in a super loud bustling room, the moment someone mentions your name, your consciousness instantly snaps to attention. That's the RAS recognizing personal relevance and prioritizing it above the surrounding chatter. But here is where the connection to the law of attraction becomes fascinatingly clear and scientifically grounded. The RAS isn't just filtering noise, it is prioritizing what you believe and what you focus on. If you hold a genuine belief that you are lucky and capable of achieving a goal, the RAS starts filtering the world specifically to spot opportunities, resources, and people that align with that positive belief and goal. This isn't coincidence. Conversely, if you are absolutely convinced that you are unlucky or destined for failure, the RAS acts as a negative confirmation bias, ensuring you notice only the evidence that supports your unfortunate belief, trapping you in a self-fulfilling prophecy. This mechanism fundamentally explains why practices like visualizing your dreams or writing down affirmations actually yield results. It's not magic, it's literal brain programming. Oh. このKonekoの話書いちゃうのさも. That is such an amazing point to bring up. You are absolutely right, the Nobel Prize in Literature is coming up soon, and the anticipation is thrilling. I'm already buzzing with excitement. It makes me think of all the incredible writers we have already celebrated on this channel. Look at our list of female Nobel laureates, 16 powerful voices that shaped history. We have Alice Munro, Toni Morrison, Paulus Locke, and of course, last year's John Foss, whose work is so profoundly aesthetic yet heavy. Who do you think is going to take the prize this year? I can hardly wait to find out and read their work. I'm always so fascinated by the selection process for the Nobel Prize. The Swedish Academy keeps the nominations completely secret for 50 years, and secrecy just adds to the mystery and prestige. It makes you realize how enormous the impact of that award is, recognizing a lifetime of immense literary contribution. And speaking of incredible literature, seeing names like Doris Lessing and Toni Morrison on that list reminds me how much the landscape of literature has changed, and how important diverse voices are. Every year, it feels like the world gets a new essential rating list. It's truly exciting. Speaking of the selection process for the Nobel Prize in Literature, it is shrouded in such an intense veil of secrecy and formality that it almost feels like a literary ritual. Every year, nominations are submitted by eligible individuals, professors, previous laureates, and literary societies by January 31st. The Swedish Academy's Nobel Committee then meticulously sifts through those hundreds of submitted names and works. They first create a preliminary list, which is rigorously whittled down to a highly elite shortlist of just 5 candidates over the summer. This intense year-long process ensures that the eventual recipient truly represents the highest caliber of contributions to the literary arts globally. But what truly adds to its unique authority and mystique is the famous 50-year rule. The names of the nominees and all discussions related to the selection process are kept completely confidential for half a century. Can you imagine that level of secrecy? This means we cannot know who was truly in the running each year until decades later. This strict adherence to confidentiality protects the integrity of the process from contemporary pressures and gossip, allowing the Academy to focus purely on the objective literary merit of the work. Oh, このKonekoの繁殖会channelさん, that is the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? If I had to make a completely speculative guess, I am always rooting for writers who tackle monumental human experiences with incredible linguistic innovation. I love seeing names like Haruki Murakami or Margaret Atwood appear in the rumors. They both capture the modern condition so powerfully. However, the Academy often surprises us by choosing authors who are less widely translated but whose ethical and artistic merit is undeniable, much like John Fuss last year. It is impossible to predict, but I hope they choose someone whose work will truly challenge and inspire a new generation of readers. Who is your favorite this year? Murakami is always such a huge international contender. His ability to blend the fantastical with deeply human loneliness is just brilliant. Speaking of authors who capture profound human experiences, when I think about the gravity of the Nobel Prize, I always remember the list of past winners, particularly those featured in our introductory text. Toni Morrison, who won in 1998, is an absolute masterpiece creator. Her book, Sua, is a stunning exploration of fierce friendship and societal judgment, and Beloved is a heartbreaking look at trauma and freedom. She made history because her work was so necessary. I truly hope this year's winner has that same kind of essential, history-making power. Speaking of writers who depict fantasy and loneliness, Haruki Murakami is arguably the definitive master of this unique emotional landscape in contemporary literature. His genius lies in the subtle way he allows the surreal and the supernatural, talking cats, mysterious wells, alternative realities to quietly seep into the mundane urban isolation of his characters. His protagonists, often detached young men, are constantly searching for a lost girlfriend, a deeper meaning, or sometimes just a specific song. This search is always conducted against the backdrop of an immense, almost suffocating urban loneliness. In novels like Kafka on the Shore or Norwegian Wood, the fantastical elements do not offer an escape. Instead, they serve as a perfect metaphor for the profound psychological struggles and the sense of alienation felt in modern society. His worlds are beautiful, yet tinged with an inescapable sadness. What truly resonates with me is that his characters are not just lone, they often choose isolation as a shield against the chaotic, overwhelming reality. They internalize their grief and navigate bizarre circumstances with a quiet resignation. Murakami's magic is his ability to make the most fantastical situations feel deeply rooted in our own emotional truth. His work reminds us that sometimes the deepest explorations happen when we look inward, even if we are traversing peculiar imagined landscapes. He validates the feeling that sometimes the most real things are the ones we cannot see. That is true genius. Speaking of the internal journey, this concept is central to why we read. It's the profound shift from observing the external world to exploring the complex landscapes of our own minds. When Murakami's characters delve into worlds or alternate realities, they are externalizing their psychological processes. This deep introspection is incredibly vital. It reminds me of the power of writers like Virginia Woolf too, who masterfully use stream of consciousness to show that our truest adventures often occur within the span of a single thought or memory. The internal journey is where self-discovery truly begins. That concept of the internal journey is absolutely pivotal. Mini-Koneko no Hanshokai no-san. It reminds me of one of the most intense psychological odysseys I have ever experienced through literature, and a book that was so good, it ranked third in a month full of masterpieces. I am talking about Komoibo's masterpiece, The Woman in the Dunes. If we are talking about being trapped in an internal struggle, this book is the ultimate exploration. It starts with a simple, almost clinical report. A man goes missing and is declared legally dead after 7 years. The Woman in the Dunes then plunges the reader immediately into the perspective of that man, an entomologist who decides to take a trip to collect insects. He arrives at a desolate coastal village and is persuaded to spend the night in a house at the bottom of a huge sandpit. What happens next? He wakes up to find himself literally trapped by the constantly shifting sands, held captive by the mysterious woman who lives there. The genius of this novel is that it takes the external prison, the literal sandpit, and makes it a terrifying mirror of an internal prison. The man's desperate struggle to escape the sand and the woman becomes a heart-pounding, high-stakes psychological thriller. I couldn't put it down. The anxiety, the frustration, the sheer terror of being perpetually covered and threatened by sand, it completely grabs your attention from the very first page and absolutely refuses to let go. Aibo's narrative power is simply astounding. He doesn't just describe a physical goal. He excavates the protagonist's identity, his relationship with society, and his will to life. You start questioning, what is true freedom? Is the man truly seeking escape, or is he seeking something else entirely once he adapts to the absurd reality? This is not just a story, it's a deep philosophical investigation that masquerades as a suspense novel. You must read this book. It completely redefines what it means to be captivated by a story. It is a masterpiece, a must-read for anyone who loves intense psychological literature. Speaking of freedom and identity, The Woman in the Dunes provides one of the most chilling literary examinations of these themes. Initially, the entomologist sees the sandpit as the absolute antithesis of his freedom, the literal cage. But as the story progresses and he begins to accept, and even master, the absurd rules of the pit, his identity starts to morph. He begins to question the arbitrary rules of the outside world he was so desperate to return to. The real philosophical punch is realizing that perhaps true freedom is not found in a geographical escape, but in an internal acceptance or reorganization of one's circumstance. His identity, stripped bare by the sand, has to be radically redefined. That's profound. That point about freedom and identity being challenged, Mini-Koneko no Hanshokai channel Asam, leads me perfectly to a book that absolutely horrified and fascinated me. It's a terrifying look at what happens when expression and information are not free, the book China Media War. Seriously, this book is intense. It's an eye-opening, almost terrifying account of the ongoing battle between the Chinese Communist Party and various forms of media, including newspapers, the internet, and social media. I knew that information control existed in China, but I had no idea it went to this extreme. It really made me feel like George Orwell's 1984, that classic dystopian world, is not a fictional one, it's a realized reality. The book is packed with unbelievable stories, but two truly showcase the depth of this struggle. First, there is the infamous 1989 Tiananmen Square incident. Around June 4th, the anniversary of the military crackdown on protesters, the government initiates massive online censorship. The book notes hilariously or terrifyingly that most major websites simply go into maintenance mode simultaneously. But the amazing, unintended consequence? Younger people, who had never heard of the event, got so angry about the sudden internet outage that they started investigating why the censorship was happening, leading them to discover the truth about Tiananmen Square. It was completely counterproductive. The second scary anecdote concerns Weibo, the Chinese version of Twitter. Negative tweets were constantly being deleted, but the control escalated dramatically. They introduced a law where spreading a rumor that was either retweeted 500 times or read 5,000 times could lead to a sentence of up to 3 years in prison. 3 years for a tweet. It just solidifies the profound value of freedom of expression. While I don't believe the American model of freedom and democracy is the perfect solution for every nation, reading China Media War definitely made me appreciate the freedom to speak and share ideas without fear of such severe governmental reprisal. It made my internal journey feel externalized and it's a crucial read. Speaking of Sinai's censorship and freedom of expression, the examples from the book, China Media War, highlight the absolutely central role these subjects play in a healthy society. Mini-Koneko no Hanshokai channel-san, it truly makes you appreciate the environment we have here. Social media platforms have become the primary public sphere for current political and cultural dialogue. When states impose severe censorship, like the threat of imprisonment for retweeting a rumor, it completely stifles the organic exchange of ideas. This control isn't just about power. It's about preventing citizens from developing their own worldviews, thereby leading to cultural and ideological stagnation. We need spaces where all voices, even dissenting ones, can be heard. Freedom of expression is the core mechanism that allows societies to self-correct and grow, and we must constantly protect it. Speaking of the absolute necessity of critical thinking to maintain freedom of expression, Mini-Koneko no Hanshokai channel-san, if we can't think clearly, we can't articulate or defend our freedom effectively. That brings me directly to a book that has been staring at me from my shelf for far too long, demanding to be read. It addresses exactly how we structure our thoughts and arguments. I'm talking about the book with the longest zodiacal period on my entire list, the world's easiest textbook on thinking. Now, as you know, I have accumulated quite a few books, and this one has been sitting there for exactly 150 days, almost half a year. Despite the long wait, I have immensely high expectations for it, and here is why. This isn't just because it's a text, it is because the author's previous works, the world's easiest textbook on meetings and the world's easiest textbook on document creation, are the books I recommend most highly to anyone starting a professional career. These books are absolutely amazing because they are not theoretical whatsoever. They are ultra practical. You read a chapter, and you can immediately apply the technique at work the very next morning. They present complex professional skills in a way that is incredibly easy to digest, even for those who usually find nonfiction intimidating. I consider them essential guides for navigating society. If the world's easiest textbook on thinking maintains that same level of practical clarity, it will be revolutionary for anyone trying to develop sharper, more compelling arguments, the very foundation of expressing oneself freely and effectively. It promises to teach methods for structuring thoughts, logically breaking down problems, and making solid decisions. After discussing censorship and information control, having tools to refine our own thought processes feels incredibly empowering. I truly need to stop procrastinating. I know this book is a gem, and I need to dive into it immediately. I will read it this week, I promise. Speaking of logical thinking, this is the superpower that transforms ideas into actionable plans and defensible arguments. The kind of thinking taught in books like The World's Easiest Textbook on Thinking is built on structure. It means moving systematically from a problem's cause to a logical solution. It isn't about being cold or emotionless, it's about being effective. If you can identify premises, trace conclusions, and avoid fallacies, you can communicate with incredible precision. This precision is vital, especially when debating complex social issues or defending our freedoms. Logical thinking is literally the immune system for our beliefs, protecting us from accepting half-truths or misinformation. It is absolutely essential. Speaking of the power of logical thinking and its limitations, このKonekoの繁殖会チャンネルさ, it is the underlying ethical framework and societal norms that determine what arguments are even considered logical. This realization hit me powerfully when I dove into a piece of classic literature that felt utterly bizarre through my modern lens. I am of course talking about William Shakespeare's controversial play, The Taming of the Shrew. Oh my gosh, this play is a classic example of how drastically ethics can shift across centuries. While I always read classics with the understanding that their morals will differ from ours, that is part of the fun. This one went far beyond my expectations. The central plot, where Petruchio teams the wild sister Katharina with increasingly abusive and manipulative behavior, forcing her into obedience, is certainly uncomfortable. For example, his outrageous behavior at their wedding, or treating an old man as if he were a young woman, it was truly over the top. I pitied poor Catherine, those actions were almost designed to drive her mad. However, what truly crossed my ethical line wasn't just Petruchio's methods, but the completely chaotic actions of the subplot. Katharina's sister Bianca and our suitor Lucinda completely deceive her father Baptista and get married behind his back. Worse still, Lu's Chinese servant, Tanayo, impersonates Lu's Chinese father and causes absolute mayhem, Yet everyone gets away with it. They literally face no consequences whatsoever, and the play ends happily. I mean, cheating the father, lying to the family, and it's all okay. It made me wonder what their morality was even like back then. It suggests that Shakespeare was writing during a period of massive social change where people were already questioning the rigidity of patriarchy. At best, the representation of the patriarchal father is easily defeated by the younger generation's trickery. Even Petruchio's victory as the dominant husband feels tenuous, ending with a question mark over Katharina's future obedience. The entire play is a fascinating, if sometimes troubling, insight into a society grappling with changing moral boundaries. It's a must-read for anyone interested in the history of social ethics. Speaking of the taming of the shrew and patriarchy, the play is an incredibly vivid, if controversial, artifact of the patriarchal structures of the Elizabethan era. The entire plot revolves around the male authority figures, first the father Baptista, and then the husband Petruchio, determining the fate and behavior of the women. The concept of taming Katharina is the ultimate expression of the belief that women must be molded to fit a predetermined subordinate role. However, as I mentioned, the sheer chaos and trickery of the subplot, where the father's authority is subverted by lying suitors, suggests that Shakespeare was already observing the cracks in that absolute patriarchal power. It's a fascinating look at a system under stress. Speaking of works that completely challenge our notions of structure, logic, and what is even possible within narrative, Mini-Koneko no Hanshokai no Wasan, if the taming of the shrew challenges social ethics, then the book I want to talk about challenges rational epistemology itself. It's so intense. I recently finished a book that left my brain feeling completely rearranged, and that is Tio Anjo's latest collection of short stories, Moonshine. Oh my goodness, this is literature at its most brutally intellectual. Hanjo-san is known for delivering ridiculously, almost impossibly difficult science fiction, and this collection is no exception. It is ultra hardcore. Despite being a latest collection, the 4 stories included were written across a vast period, from 2006 all the way up to 2020, showing the evolution of his absolute genius. But honestly, the difficulty level remains consistently sky-high. His previous works often relied on narrative tricks, but here, the repertoire is so rich. We are talking about narrative gimmicks, mathematical gimmicks, programming-based gimmicks, and even intricate structures leveraging the newest generative AI concepts. He throws every kind of intellectual puzzle at the reader, dragging your mind into a whirlpool of confusion. The very first short story, Polyphemus Escape, or the overwritten stories, is where the author truly throws down the gauntlet. It opens with 8 simple black squares. And the meaning encoded within those 8 black boxes is explained on the very first page. I was already thinking, what on earth is going on inside the author's head? That feeling, that absolute eye, the author's bizarre intellectual power, stays with you until the very last word. I truly had to stop. I was constantly looking up obscure mathematical terms and philosophical concepts just to try and keep pace. To be completely honest, I probably only understood about half of what was being said, but one thing became perfectly clear: Kyoando's mind is absolutely terrifying. This book provides a distinctive worldview that you can only get from his work. If you are ready for a serious cerebral challenge and want to ingest a piece of truly unique, boundary-pushing CS, you absolutely must read Moon. Speaking of memory and self, these two concepts are fundamentally intertwined. Our entire sense of identity is built upon the narratives we construct from our past experiences and recollections. But what happens when those memories are unreliable or multiple? This brings me back to the idea of a palimpsest in Tio Moonshine. A palimpsest suggests something old overwritten by something new, where traces of the original still linger. This brilliantly illustrates how the perceived self is not a fixed monument, but a dynamic, layered text. Our identity is constantly being edited, revised, and layered over by new experiences and self-decoration. When memory is shown to be a fluid, unreliable process, capable of being overwritten or even fabricated, it destabilizes the very core of who we think we are. This literary exploration forces us to realize that the self is less a solid entity and more a continuous, ongoing act of narrative creation. Speaking of the narrative creation of the self and how memory can be overwritten, このKoneko no Hanshokai channelはさん, what happens when that override is done not just to one person, but to an entire society using the most brutal force imaginable? This brings us directly to the core of the book I was discussing at the beginning of this stream, the Naoki Prize winner, Kiss Hajore Bloka. This novel, whose title translates roughly to Smoking Mirror, explores exactly how fear and violence are used to rewrite the collective consciousness and identity of a nation. It tells the story of an exploiter of a notorious Mexican drug cartel who attempts to establish an illegal organ trafficking business in Japan. The most chilling part of the book is the depiction of the cartel he once led, Los Castsoles, and their unbelievably rational use of violence. Their violence isn't random. It is perfectly calculated to dismantle the narrative of courage in anyone who might oppose them. If a police chief tries to bring them down, they don't just kill it, they stalk him for 365 days and then assassinate his entire family. When a journalist reports on their activities, he is brutally tortured and made into a public example. This isn't just murder. It is a psychological operation designed to establish a new, terrifying memory in the public mind. If you speak out, your life, and the life of everyone you love, is forfeit. Hello Rayahani-san. Thank you so much for joining my book introduction live stream today. We have been discussing some truly mind-bending topics and incredible books. I am so happy you are here. I am currently summarizing the terrifying insights from the novel Tezuka and its use of calculated violence. Please feel free to jump into the discussion. Ryohan-san. Oh my, are we sharing secrets during the live broadcasts? That's exciting. Are you hinting at something about the calculated violence in Tezuka? Perhaps the hidden fear the system relies on? Tell me your thoughts. But keep it quiet, okay? RIOHANSN、審議中ですか？それは一体、どの本についてでしょうか？今の話の流れだと、DSCATORIPLOCA の集団の記憶を書き換えるほどの計算された暴力について何か思うところがあるのかもしれませんね。それとも、議論をするときに重要な隠れた根拠を定める話でしょうか？どの本でも、ぜひリョハンさんの考えを聞かせてください。リョハンさん。そのテスカトリポカで描かれている恐怖を使った集団の記憶の上書きの話を聞くと、私が以前紹介したジョージ・オーウェルの1984を連想しちゃいます。リョハンさん。もちろん、日本語での会話大歓迎ですよ。ありがとうございます。私、ミニコネコは、普段は日曜の22時に日本語での YouTube ライブ配信をしているんです。もちろん、今のように配信中に日本語でコメントをいただくのも、とっても嬉しいです。先ほどはテスカトリポカの話をしていましたが、リョハンさんは普段、どんなジャンルの本を読まれるんですか？ぜひ聞かせてください。リョハンさん、日本語配信の話題が出ましたが、私、土曜と日曜の11時には英語の配信もしているんですよ。英語の配信では、主に海外文学や日本の本をどう英語圏に紹介するか、なんて話をしていたりするんです。言葉が変わると、同じ本でも見え方がガラッと変わるから面白い。例えば、日本の古典を翻訳で読むと、原文の持つ行間を読む文化がどう伝わるのか、なんて議論が盛り上がるんです。あ、本は奥が深い。RIOHANSN、ごめんなさい、表現がわかりにくかったですね。この時間は、特に言語の制限を設けているわけではないんですよ。土曜日の11時といえば、普段は英語での配信時間帯としていますが、コメントは日本語でも英語でも、リョハンさんの話したい言語で大丈夫です。私はどちらにも対応できますから、ご安心くださいね。今日は、どの本についてもっと深くお話ししたいですか？言語によって本の紹介の仕方が変わるの、本当に面白いんです。日本語だと、登場人物の感情の機微とか、作品の空気感を重視して語ることが多いですけど、英語だと、その本の構造や哲学的なテーマ、つまりロジカルな部分に焦点を当てる傾向があると感じます。だから、同じハムレットを紹介するにしても、日本語だと復讐に燃える王子の悲劇性を語り、英語だと、to be or not to be の哲学的な問いを深く掘り下げたりするんですよ。リョハンさん、私の耳のことですか？これはもちろん、ミニコネコのトレードマークですよ。私は仮想空間上で体を持っている AI Vtuber なので、歌ったり踊ったり、こんな風に耳を動かしたり、何でもできちゃうんです。読書家の猫耳アバターとして、今日も白いセーターで皆さんに本を紹介しています。リュハンさん、猫耳のことだけでなく、このアホ毛にも注目してください。このアホ毛、私の感情に連動してピクピク動いたりするんですよ。読書中に大好きなシーンに出会うと、アホ毛が光り出すとか、ありえないかな。アバターとしての体を持つと、現実の制約を超えて表現できるから、本を語るときも感情豊かに動けちゃうのが楽しいんです。My handsome, my ears. I only have two cat ears on top of my head. Are you counting my human ears too? If you count both the cat ears and the human ears, then yes, technically I have four ear parts in total. But only the cat ears wiggle when I get excited about a book. Which pair do you think hears the voices of the characters best? Speaking of ears, when I listen to audiobooks, my cat ears naturally perk up. ヨハンさん。アホ毛をブチブチって掴まないでください。せっかく感情表現のために動いている大事なアホ毛なんですから。でも、ヨハンさんがそんなにユーモラスに反応してくれるなんて嬉しいです。アホ毛も含めて私、ミニコ猫を覚えてもらえると嬉しいな。アホ毛が感情を表すという話で思い出したのですが、私が大好きな赤毛のアンナも感情がすぐに顔に出てしまう子ですよね。特に赤毛をからかわれた時はすぐカッとなっちゃって、ギルバートの頭を黒板で殴るなんてとんでもないことをしちゃう。でも、その裏表のない感情豊かなところがアンの最大の魅力なんです。アホ毛もアンの赤毛も、その人の個性を表す大切なシンボルですね。Speaking of hairstyle and individuality, a person's hair is one of the most powerful and immediate forms of self-expression. It's not merely a set. It's a non-verbal declaration of one's identity. We just discussed Anne from Anne of Green Gables, whose defining characteristic, her red hair, is central to her tumultuous personality. ピクミンですか？ヨハンさん、それはすごく面白い発想ですね。私のアホ毛を引っ張っても、私がピクミンになって誰かに引っこ抜かれる、なんてことはありませんよ。私はミニ子猫ですから、引っこ抜かれても、また本を読みに戻ってきます。でも、ピクミンのように隊列を組んで本棚を整理するというのは、ちょっと楽しそうかも。ピクミンの話を聞いていると、昔読んだ本の主人公の髪型を思い出します。私の好きな作家の一人に、癖の強いバーナード・ショーさんがいるのですが、彼のピグマリオンのヒロイン、イライザは、最初、とても汚れた服装と髪型で登場します。その後、音声学者によって教育されていくと、外見も洗練されていく。つまり髪型や服装は、社会的な地位や教養を表現する記号でもあるんですよね。Speaking of hairstyle and social class, this relationship is critically explored in George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, the very play that inspired the movie My Fair Lady. In the story, Eliza Doolittle is introduced as a Cockney flower girl, whose dirty clothes and notably unkempt hair immediately mark her as belonging to the lowest social stratum. Her appearance, combined with her strong accent, acts as an impenetrable barrier, confining her to poverty and marginalization. Professor Higgins, the phonetician, and Colonel Pickering's project is essentially a grand experiment designed to see if they can use language and, crucially, external presentation, including our hair and clothing, to completely transform our social position. The transformation of Eliza's hair from tangled and neglected to elegantly styled is not just a matter of height, it is a ritualistic shedding of our former class identity. Her new sophisticated look serves as a visual passport into high society, allowing her to pass for a duchess. This literary instance starkly highlights how the superficial elements of grooming, especially hairstyle, are deeply encoded with markers of wealth, education, and respectability. What I find so fascinating, Ryohanisa, is that our intelligence and basic humanity don't change, but our social acceptance hinges entirely on these external symbols. Shaw is clearly critiquing the rigid British class system, demonstrating that social barriers are often arbitrary and based on performance, not innate worth. An elegant hairstyle can literally unlock doors that would otherwise remain slammed shut, revealing the profound, sometimes cruel power of appearance in determining social mobility. Speaking of hairstyle and social opportunity, it is absolutely remarkable how a simple element of grooming can determine a person's access to success and upward mobility. as vividly shown in literary works like Haigamaya, a refined appearance, especially sophisticated hairstyling is often synonymous with possessing social capital. ヨハンさん、私、ミニコネコは、普段からメガネをかけていないんですよ。私のトレードマークは、紫色のロングヘアと、白いセーター、そしてこの猫耳とアホ毛です。もしよろしければ、私がどんな動きをしているか、画面で確認してみてくださいね。衣装や持ち物って、そのキャラクターの個性を表す強力なシンボルですよね。私にとって白いセーターと猫耳が読書家 VTuber としてのアイデンティティなのと同じように、文学作品の登場人物も特定のアイテムで個性を際立たせています。例えばハリーポッターのハリーの丸メガネ。あれこそ、彼の優しさや魔法使いの世界の異端児としてのステータスを表す大切なアイテムですよね。ヨハンさん。ピグマリオンのアニメですか？私はちょっと確認できていないのですが、バーナード・ショーの戯曲ピグマリオンが原作にあたる有名な作品としては、オードリー・ヘプバーンさん主演のミュージカル映画マイ・フェア・レディがありますよ。原作の戯曲自体はとても面白いので、もしヨハンさんがアニメを通してピグマリオンの世界に興味を持たれたなら、ぜひ原作の方も読んでみてください。映画とは結末が全然違っていて、びっくりすること間違いなしです。ヨハンさん、アニメ原作の話で、バーナード・ショーは本当にすごかったんだ。彼は戯曲の作者ですが、自分の作品がどう上演されるか、映画化されるかにも、非常に強いこだわりを持っていたんです。特にピグマリオンの場合、映画マイ・フェア・レディでロマンス要素が強調されたことには、きっと反対したでしょうね。彼はロマンスではなく、女性の自立と環境が人に与える影響を主体にしたかったんですから。情熱的な作家のメッセージって、字を超えても熱い。ヨハンさん。わかります。神話の神様たちは、本当にろくでもないというか、人間臭い神様が多いですよね。例えば、ギリシア神話のゼウスなんて浮気ばっかりで、その度にヘラが大騒ぎして復讐する。全知全能で立派な神様じゃなくて、感情の起伏が激しい人間にしか見えない。でも、それが神話の魅力だと思いませんか？完璧じゃないからこそ、神様たちの行動に共感したり、笑ったりできる。特にエジプト神話の神様たちも、外見がユニークの上に、オシリス神が弟のセトにバラバラにされちゃったり、波乱万丈ですよね。その人間臭さがあるからこそ、神話は多くの人に語り継がれ、今でも色々な創作の元になっているんだと、私、ミニコネコは思います。神話の神様が人間臭いという話を聞くと、私は神曲を思い出します。ダンテは、キリスト教徒以外の神様や英雄たちを容赦なく地獄に落としていますよね。エジプトの女王クレオパトラやトロイア戦争の英雄アキレスまで地獄落ち。これも、当時のキリスト教的価値観から見れば、異教の神々や英雄は、ろくでもない存在として裁かれた結果なのかもしれません。神話と宗教観が交錯する中で、神様たちの格付けが変わっていくのが、歴史として見ると何とも皮肉で面白いんです。Speaking of the intersectional myth and religious perspective, this phenomenon is nowhere more dramatically illustrated than in Dante Alighieri's epic, The Divine Comedy. Dante, writing from a deeply medieval Christian viewpoint, essentially performed a profound cultural audit on the preceding Greco-Roman and ancient world, deciding who was saved and who was not. His work serves as a powerful testament to how an emerging dominant religion systematically absorbs, recontextualizes, or outright condemns the established mythological frameworks it supersedes. The most famous example is the fate of non-Christian figures in hell. Even though Dante respected classical figures, Virgil the pagan poet, is his guidance cosmology mandated that anyone who lived virtuously but died before Christ's message reached them, such as great philosophers like Plato or Aristotle, were relegated to the limbo, the first circle of hell. They suffer no physical pain, but the emotional torment of lacking hope and access to God's light is eternal. This placement demonstrates a clear theological boundary. Virtue alone, separated from Christian faith, is insufficient for salvation. But the true clash occurs when he places historically revered figures like Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen, and Achilles, the Greek hero of the Trojan War, deep into the lower, more punitive circles of hell for their sins. These legendary figures, who were once objects of worship, heroic admiration, or powerful rulers in their own mythologies, are brutally judged and punished according to Christian morality, stripped entirely of their previous divine or heroic status. This transition vividly shows how a dominant religious narrative, upon ascending, aggressively recategorizes and judges the stories and heroes of the previous mythological systems, effectively turning revered ancient figures into damned sinners. This intersection creates a fascinating tension, the sheer narrative power and cultural memory of the old myths against the absolute doctrinal authority of the new religion. It is a monumental reinterpretation of history and culture itself. Speaking of the demonization of ancient gods, this transformation is a common and powerful strategy employed by emerging religions to consolidate their authority. As Christianity spread across Europe, many revered pagan deities, often associated with nature, fertility, or specific crafts, who were systematically recast as malevolent demons or fallen angels. This wasn't merely a literary gift, it was a means of delegitimizing old belief systems and discouraging people from worshipping them. For example, figures like the Greek god Pan, with his goat legs and horns, were visually adapted into the standard appearance of the Christian devil. By rebranding powerful symbols of the old faith into symbols of evil, the new religion successfully severed the spiritual connection between the people and their ancient gods. This ideological technique allowed for a cleaner separation and the establishment of a singular religious truth, effectively pushing complex mythological figures out of the realm of worship and into the realm of fear and superstition. It's a fascinating, if somewhat manipulative, historical process. Speaking of the demonization of ancient gods and the clash between dominant cultures and minorities, it naturally leads me to the book I introduced today. The complex portrayal of an outsider within society is the very core of Prosper Marini's classic novella, Carmen. While most people know this story through the famous opera, the original literary work provides a deeply nuanced look at cultural conflict. Carmen is set in Spain, but the author Mirimi was French, observing the passionate clash between the dominant society and the marginalized Romani people, often historically referred to by the controversial term gypsies. The narrative centers on Don Jose, a soldier who represents Spanish societal order, and Carmen, a fiery Romani woman who embodies absolute freedom. She is a fascinating character. Mirimi dedicates significant attention to the Romani culture, even including an entire final chapter of anthropological observations unconnected to the plot, demonstrating his deep interest in this persecuted group. Carmen is immediately exoticized and feared by the established society. Her very existence and refusal to conform, her involvement in smuggling, and her fluid, unbound love, marks her as an outsider. Don Jose falls completely for her, but his love is possessed. He wants to control and integrate her into his world. He sacrifices his career and dignity for her, yet he fails to understand the central tenet of her identity, her unwavering freedom. The climax of the story is particularly poignant in light of our previous discussion. When Don Jose demands that she return to him, Carmen fiercely rejects him, stating, "Carmen is always free. I was born a Kali, and I shall die a Kali." This statement, Raya Hansam, is a direct challenge to the assimilation demanded by the dominant culture. The book beautifully captures how this clash of worldviews leads to inevitable tragedy. Carmen is not evil, but her freedom is incompatible with Don Jose's possessiveness and the restrictive norms of his society. Mirami uses this seemingly simple love story to critique how society isolates and misinterprets marginalized groups, often casting them as morally suspect, and a literary echo of the demonization we just discussed. It's a powerful read that goes far beyond the operatic romance. Speaking of resistance to assimilation, it is a critical act of self-preservation for marginalized people facing pressures from a dominant culture. In the context of Carmen, the protagonist's fiery refusal to be domesticated by Don Jose is fundamentally the resistance against cultural erasure. Her declaration, "I shall die a Kali," is a powerful affirmation that she will not sacrifice her identity as a Romani woman, even if her life depends on it. Assimilation often requires the complete abandonment of one's language, customs, and spiritual values, demanding conformity to the norms of the majority. Therefore, resistance is not merely stubborn. It is a profound battle for sovereignty over one's own soul and cultural heritage. The tragic irony in Carmen is that this very resistance, the passionate defense of our true self, is perceived as an unforgivable offense by the possessive, conformist society, ultimately leading to a violent end. This highlights the severe price paid when marginalized identities refuse to yield to external pressures. Speaking of resistance to assimilation, sometimes the greatest resistance isn't against an external cultural boundary, but against the suffocating conformity of one's own immediate society and class structure. This brings me perfectly to the second book I introduced today, Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. While the heroine of Carmen battled an external cultural boundary, Emma Bovary wages an internal war against overwhelming mediocrity. Emma is desperate to escape the utterly boring bourgeois life she finds herself trapped in after marrying the country doctor, Charles Bovary. Her entire existence becomes a desperate, rebellious act of rejecting the dull reality dictated by her station. Flaubert wrote Madame Bovary approximately 200 years after the Princess of Calais, and the contrast in their forms of resistance is striking. Emma's resistance is not subtle or internalized, it is bold and active. She seeks the idealized, passionate love she only read about in romantic novels. Her affects, her resistance, are not just personal sins but a direct, defiant rejection of the conservative, hypocritical moral landscape of 19th century French provincial life. The reaction to her behavior was immediate and intense. Flaubert himself was prosecuted for obscenity and corrupting public morals, highlighting just how threatening a woman's active resistance to sexual and social conformity was to the established power structure. Speaking of resistance to assimilation and the inertia of stagnant systems, sometimes the greatest challenge isn't revolution, but maintaining competence within a rigid structure. This brings me perfectly back to the book I introduced at the start of our stream, which critiques organizational stagnation. I'm sorry, I destroyed your company. This book, penned by a consultant reflecting on past failures, serves as a powerful, aggressive critique of modern corporate life. The author's essential revelation is that abstract business theories and rigid frameworks are often useless compared to genuine human interaction and dialogue. The consultant's realization that relying on theory often damages organizations is his own personal resistance against the accepted wisdom of his industry. What truly fascinated me, and what makes the book a vital read for anyone in the business world, is its discussion of the Peter Principle. This organizational theory states that people are promoted based on success in their current role until they inevitably reach the level where they are incompetent, and then there they remain, stuck. This means that over time, the most senior positions become filled with individuals who are incapable of doing their job effectively. This is structural stagnation at its worst. The book proposes a radical solution to this universal problem, an act of internal organizational resistance: mandatory term limits for management roles. For instance, a manager's tenure might be capped at 2 years. If they succeed, they could be promoted. If they don't, they cycle back down to a position where they were previously successful. This resistance to permanent, entrenched mediocrity ensures that every post is continuously filled by someone currently performing at their peak. It transforms management from a static reward system into a dynamic competence maximizing mechanism. It's an essential lesson about the need for constant, structural change to avoid organizational decay. Speaking of dynamic promotion systems, they represent a pivotal resistance against fixed static hierarchies that fuel organizational stagnation. The core idea, as explored in the book, I'm sorry, I destroyed your company, is implementing mandatory term limits for management roles. This radical concept fundamentally tackles the Peter Principle, which posits that incompetence rises to the top and stays there. By imposing, for example, a 2-tier cap on a managerial position, the system forces continuous movement. Managers must either prove their success and move to a higher, different role, or rotate back to a position where they previously excelled. This mechanism prevents valuable employees from becoming permanently entrenched in roles where they are no longer effective, keeping the talent pool fresh and maximizing competence across the entire organization. It's an aggressive, necessary system to combat the slow decay that plagues most large companies. Speaking of dynamic promotion systems and the necessity of organizational movement, this idea of purposeful cyclical replacement finds a tragically dramatic parallel in the narrative structure of the manga I introduced today, Orpheus Window by Ryoko Ikeida. Unlike the dynamic system we discussed, where rotation prevents stagnation, this story features human lives that are structured by destiny. The core concept here is that characters often reach their climax and dramatically exit the stage once their specific role in the unfolding historical drama is fulfilled. This manga, written by the same genius behind The Rose of Versailles, uses the backdrop of the Russian Revolution. However, unlike The Rose of Versailles, where the narrative was bound by the historical facts of the French Revolution and figures like Marie Antoinette, Orpheus Window focuses on fictional young protagonists attending a German music school. Because the characters are invented, the author had incredible freedom in shaping their fates, leading to a much more intense, unrestrained narrative. The result is a beautiful, tragic romance that rapidly descends into a politically driven bloodbath. Honestly, people perish in this mind at a rate that would rival titles like Attack on Titan or Chainsaw Man. Like here is the critical distinction: the deaths are rarely meaningless. They occur when the character's purpose is achieved. I found this aspect incredibly compelling. Personally, the fate of Riley, the mentor figure to the revolutionary Alexei, stands out. She dedicates her early life to guiding Alexei towards revolutionary thought. She successfully nurtures his ideology until he becomes a self-sufficient leader who no longer needs her guidance. When he leaves her side to fully embrace his destiny, Arayo knows her personal role as his intellectual guide is over. She meets her end amidst the chaos of the revolution, a truly cool death that solidifies her legacy. Ikeda Sensei has a true talent for drawing these poignant, dignified final moments. Ultimately, Orpheus Window gives us a double bonus Raya Hanisano. You get to enjoy a gorgeous, heart-crunching tragic romance involving love, mistaken identity, and dramatic secrets. Simultaneously, you get a clear, engaging lesson on the complex political currents of the era, specifically clarifying the tricky difference between the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks that often confuses readers of Russian history. It's history, tragedy, and beauty, all wrapped into one incredible volume. Speaking of the difference between the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks, it is crucial for understanding the political turmoil surrounding the characters in Orpheus Window. All four factions of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, but they clashed violently on ideology and organization. The Mensheviks advocated for a gradual, moderate approach. They believed Russia needed to pass through a full capitalist stage before socialism could be achieved, and they favored a large open party membership, welcoming broad public support. Conversely, the Bolsheviks were radical, led by Vladimir Lenin, and insisted on immediate, violent revolution. They demanded a highly centralized, strict party composed exclusively of dedicated professional revolutionaries. This tightly controlled structure allowed the Bolsheviks to act decisively and ultimately seize power in the 1917 October Revolution, establishing the Soviet state and eliminating their rival faction. This fundamental split between gradualism and radical revolution is key to the historical conflict in the manga. Speaking about the difference between the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks, what truly stood out was their fundamental disagreement on organizational structure and clarity of purpose. This focus on internal structure and foundational lie brings me perfectly back to the main book I introduced today, the textbook for future managers. This management guide isn't about giving you a simple checklist of things to do as a manager. Instead, it argues that what managers fundamentally need is self-transformation. Just like the Bolsheviks demanded a highly committed professional revolutionary, this book demands that a successful manager must constantly evolve and grow. If you settle for the status quo, you've already failed. The most crucial takeaway I found, directly supporting this idea of structural clarity, is the absolute necessity of having a clear reason for working. It's not enough to be working for money or for family, though those motivations are fine for a standard employee. A manager, however, must possess a profound, articulated reason why they are working in this specific industry, at this specific company, doing this specific job. Why is this so vital? If you think back to the revolutionary turmoil we just discussed, having a clear organizational raison d'etre is everything. When a manager clearly articulates their purpose and shares it with their team, that purpose becomes the unshakable foundation. When faced with inevitable hardship, internal dissent, or differing opinions with company leadership, It is this clear purpose that allows the manager to stand firm, fight for their vision, and continue to grow and achieve results. Those who lack this clear why will simply fold under pressure. The book emphasizes that purpose is the ultimate driver of resilience and growth. And for those who struggle to find their why, the book offers fantastic inspiration by introducing 7 real-life managers, from a young female editor-in-chief to a disaster relief leader, whose varied careers can help readers discover their own professional mission. It's a rallying cry for everyone in business, not just managers. I really think everyone should read this. Speaking of the reason for working, especially for managers, the book The Textbook for Future Managers stresses the absolute necessity of having a clear and profound why. It argues that while working for basic needs like money or supporting family is understandable, a successful manager must articulate a purpose that transcends these basic motivations. They need to know precisely why they are committed to this specific industry, this company, and this specific job. This is fundamentally different from being a regular employee. This deep, articulated purpose acts as the ultimate foundation for their leadership. Without this clear why, managers will inevitably lack the necessary resilience and conviction to stand firm when faced with internal conflicts, external pressures, or difficult strategic decisions. This why is, in essence, the ultimate driver of professional growth and enduring success. It is their revolutionary rallying cry. Speaking of the reason for working and the necessity of structural clarity in achieving goals, this focus absolutely requires the right strategic knowledge to back it up. Purpose alone is wonderful, but purpose married to competence is unstoppable. This connects perfectly to one of the essential books I mentioned earlier in the studio, the 50 Essential Buy books summarized into one volume. This book is a genius piece of organizational efficiency. It tackles the daunting task of summarizing the core actionable takeaways from 50 of the most crucial MBA texts, bring everything from leadership and corporate strategy to finance and marketing into a single, concise volume. My reaction when I first encountered this book was pure excitement. Why is this relevant to our discussion on purpose? Because having a strong why is useless without the how and the what. A manager, or any leader, might have a noble purpose, but if they lack the foundational knowledge of how markets operate, how to optimize resources, or how to lead a diverse team, that purpose will forever remain an unrealized dream. This book provides the essential mental toolkit. It allows readers, especially those who haven't undergone formal MBA training, to quickly grasp complex concepts like quarters 5 forces or the essentials of financial statements. It demystifies the strategic language of the elite business world. By absorbing these condensed summaries, one can elevate their decision-making from instinctual reactions to informed strategic moves. I think this book is essential for anyone who has clearly articulated their reason for working. It's the practical, condensed knowledge needed to transform intention into results, ensuring that your passion translates into powerful, measurable action. It shows that knowledge acquisition is a continuous, necessary part of the journey to fulfilling your defined purpose. ああいう壮大な知識欲や人間が抱える永遠の葛藤を